suppose this evening I was invited by Vita House to talk about addiction and its effects on family. And a lot of the previous speakers have alluded to, I suppose, the concept of family and how we're impacted. Either I'm not going to bore you with too many definitions or slides, but I suppose when we think about drugs, we kind of look at it and say, well, what are they? Why do people take them? And people take them to change the way they feel, think or behave. And if you think about if you're living with someone that actually changes how they think, behaves or feels when they're under the influence of a substance, that can be quite hurtful because it almost feels like there's a different person. Lots of people will take drugs. They will take licit drugs, they will take illicit drugs. Illicit drugs would be things like maybe prescribed painkillers and things like that. We've seen an increase over the last few years in terms of benzos and sleeping tablets and things like that. Alcohol is another one. We don't know exactly how many people take drugs in this country. We can only work on stats such as treatment figures, seizures, and I mean kind of Garda seizures, not actual seizures, even though some people will have them too. But we also don't know why lots of people can take drugs. They might take them for a while or they might take them periodically and then move on. Typically teenagers, for example, will experiment, but a certain percentage will go on and develop an addiction. There are many theories of addiction, and not one, I suppose, resonates more than the other. So it depends, I suppose, on what school of thought maybe you might find yourself. So, for example, we have what's called the disease model. Some people will call it an actual disease, a physical and biological and a spiritual disorder, I suppose, or depletion. Others would regard it as a brain disorder. For others, it might be a genetic disorder, that there's a heritability factor in developing an addiction. And for others, it might be other factors like social learning. We're in a position now where a lot of drugs are very available and very accessible, and people are in a position to access them quite readily. And there's one other kind of theory, I suppose, that resonates, and we see a lot of it, and a lot of young people would tell us, is that they take them because they want to cope with stress or that they want to relieve themselves from pain. I often ask people, why did you take the drugs? What was it for you? And they might say, well, first of all, it was out of curiosity or it was out of boredom or I wanted to experiment. But when we move into addiction, they often say, I wanted relief from pain or I wanted to soothe myself from pain. There's some sense of escape. And I think sometimes the question is, and we don't often maybe ask it enough, what are we escaping from and why are we trying to escape from it? Why do we go down that route? So in terms of addiction, and I know a lot of people have mentioned families already, I would say everybody in the family is impacted in some way by someone else's addiction, whether that person lives in the home or not. There was a train of thought years ago that it was only really the person that was using drugs, whoever was substance dependent or the addict, they're the ones that were impacted. Families weren't kind of given, I suppose, the understanding or the compassion that they deserved, that living with addiction can be extremely traumatic, can be extremely painful. And in many cases, when we talk about who is to blame, families themselves would be blamed. So if somebody went into treatment a number of years ago, it was your mammy's fault, your daddy's fault, your great-grandfather's fault, and we do talk about intergenerational stuff. For me, I find it very hard, particularly if I talk to parents, because they will blame themselves. It's not even other people's judging them or society. They'll judge themselves even as well. They will kind of turn around and they will say, what did I do wrong? How did I go wrong with him? You know, and sometimes even if it's parents in particular, you know, they'll get into arguments or they'll blame each other. You were too soft on him. Oh, well, you were too hard on him, do you know? And it's very, very difficult. And I suppose it isn't really about blame, because if we go back and think, we don't really know what causes addiction. We don't know why some people are more susceptible than others. So who are we going to blame? It also poses kind of an ethical question at times in terms of, if we don't really know what causes it, do we know best how we're treating it? Okay? And I think the one thing that I would kind of ask for people is, we're never too far away, and I guarantee you if I was to go around the room this evening, everybody would know somebody, you may even be connected to somebody yourself, that would be impacted by some form of addiction.